Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. This is Joe, the bearded historian. He'll tell you an interesting story. Be careful of his soldiers, they can be brats. This is Angel, she's an entity. She'll cause chaos and plant her hands at you. This is Sue, she likes spirits, not the alcohol. She's the reason this channel exists. This is David, he likes fire trucks. He's here occasionally. Bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong, bing bongy bong. We preserve his story. Alright, are you ready? It's Wednesday. I'm running a little bit late, but that's okay. We're getting it done. Today's video is about homesteading, so I've chosen farm animals because, well, a lot of homesteads had farm animals to try to support themselves and their family. And a lot of our pictures have to do with pets of sorts. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out time. Here's a shout out just over here. You support me, I'll support you. This shout out is for our friends. Let's see who it is today. There we go. We've got Shadow, we've got Tessa, Stock, Tay Weezing, Rushmore, Unseen, April, Amboys, and My Girl, Generations, Vaughn, Popcorn, Heather, Michael, Stock, David Mercy, Butter Roll, Gallivanting, Ava, there's Gen X, Just Speaks, Lynch, Amboys, Hillbillies, Mayhem, Marketplace. Oh, there's gonna be Gen X. Alright, there are our Gen Xers. Now this is Nick and Jill. I almost forgot their name because I'm a genius. These are a couple who live on the other side of the continent. You're Shire-based. The next couple, we are not climbing a mountain climbing. We usually live for food, drinks, and other things. So they do a lot of travel. Oh, and I'm clicked on the one that they're not using currently because I'm a genius. There we go. Steampunk Festival, Goth Weekend. There's, of course, some shorts with Mr. Nick being weird. So check them out. Like, share, comment, and have a good day. Alright, so the music historian is going to tell you something somewhat interesting, maybe informative, who knows.
Well, why would you want to be, informative and information, all that fun stuff?
History.
History. Oh, that's it. That's what they call that. Yeah.
Isn't that the point?
Usually.
Oh, okay.
Like everything is that there's always going to be a chain reaction and timing and all that good stuff. Now, the whole concept of a Homestead Act, as they had originally planned it back in 1862, was the idea that they would get citizens, American citizens, could get their hands on 160 acres worth of land. The Homestead Act was set up May 20th, 1862, which is why we got it pegged for today. And what would wind up happening is that there was a number of policies and politics that led to this point. One of the first slices of this was a thing called the Preemption Act of 1841. This would allow settlers to claim up to 160 acres of federal land for themselves and prevent its sale to others, including large landowners or corporations. They would only pay a low fixed price of $1.25 per acre. And to qualify, the person had to be either 21 years old or a head of household, like a parent, surviving sibling, supporting a family, a citizen, or an immigrant declaring to become a citizen, and the resident had to be on that land for a minimum of 14 months. So pretty quick, pretty effective, good way to get it under the pegs.
No.
Now, oh well, you know, it's what becomes creative.
Oh, now Oregon creative?
Oh, we have to be creative because I mean,
Damn it.
this was out before the Civil War even broke out.
Oh dear.
To get permanent title to the land, the person had to accomplish certain actions, such as to continue to reside on it or improve it for at least 5 years, and they could not leave or abandon it for more than 6 months at a time. So you couldn't go over here and say,
So
"This is
technically,
mine."
it could still be a summer home.
Right.
Or are they then?
You know, go off to a day job so that at least they can make money
I'm just saying.
and not starve to death. Now, the next peg of this operation, the Donation Land Claim Act, allowed settlers to claim land in the Oregon Territory, then including the modern states of Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and parts of Wyoming. The Oregon Donation Land Claim Act was passed in 1850 and allowed white settlers to claim 320 acres or 640 to married couples between 1850 and 1855 when that act was repealed. Now, before being repealed in 1855, the land was sold for $1.25 per acre, and the creation of the Oregon Territory in 1848, the U.S. government had passed the most generous land distribution bill in U.S. history. Now, the Oregon Land Donation Act of 1850 had many negative effects on indigenous people as well as black people in the Pacific Northwest. Not only did they act to use the land taken away from the tribes in the Pacific Northwest, but the act also barred black citizens from owning land and real estate. This act guaranteed land for white settlers and half-breed Indian men in the Oregon Territory. The act followed the passing of the 1848 Territorial Organic Act, which allowed any white settler to claim a maximum of 640 acres. The Land Donation Act, however, also acknowledged that women's property rights due to Congress allowing the donation of 400 acres to settlers, land that could be claimed by heads of households, including women. This act differed from the Homestead Act of 1866 due to the ineligibility of black citizens from applying. Well, in 1862, the Homestead Act was brought around. The yeoman farmer ideal of Jeffersonian democracy was still a powerful influence in American politics in the 1840s and 1850s, with many politicians believing a Homestead Act would increase the number of virtuous yeomen. The Free Soil Party of 1848 to 1852 and the New Republican Party after 1854 demanded that the new lands opening up in the West be made available to independent farmers rather than wealthy planters who would develop it with their use of slaves, forcing the yeoman farmers onto marginal lands. Now, Southern Democrats had continuously fought and defeated previous homestead law proposals, and they feared free land would attract European immigrants and poor Southern whites to the West. Well, the intent of the Homestead Act in 1862, remember, this is when the Civil War had just started, was to reduce the cost of homesteading under the Preemption Act. After the South seceded and their delegates left Congress in 1861, the Republicans and supporters from the Upper South passed the Homestead Act, signed by Abraham Lincoln, on May 20th, 1862, and it went into effect the following January on the 1st, 1863. Leading advocates were Andrew Johnson, George Henry Evans, and Horace Greeley. George Henry Evans famously coined the phrase, "Vote yourself a farm," in a bid to garner support for the movement. In addition to this previous requirement in the Preemption Act of either being 21 years old or a head of the family, the 1862 Act also allowed for persons under 21 who had served in the regular or volunteer forces of the U.S. Army or Navy for at least 14 days during the existence of actual war, domestic or foreign. The new act also required that the person has never borne arms against the United States government or given aid or comfort to the enemies, unlike the 1848 or 1850 laws. It did not have any provision mentioning race. The act gave citizens or intended citizens 160 acres of surveyed land public if they improved their plot by cultivating the land. Now, the Homestead Act expanded rather than changed the Preemption Act. The claimed homestead could include the same land which they had previously filed a preemption claim on, up to 160 acres at $1.25 per acre, or up to 80 acres of subdivided and surveyed land at $2.50 an acre, and they could expand the current ownership to the contiguous adjacent land up to 160 acres total. Now, the homestead application must be made for his or her exclusive use and benefit, and that said entry onto public land is made for the purpose of actual settlement and cultivation, and not either directly or indirectly for the use or benefit of any other person or persons whomsoever. This acquired land would not be liable for any debts incurred prior to the issuance of the patent for it. Now, the time requirements for residences or cultivation was set at 5 years if it was proven, after due notice, that they had moved residence or abandoned the land for more than 6 months at a time. Then the land reverted to the government. The homesteader could also pay the $1.25 current rate per acre price after proof of the less stringent requirements set in the Preemption Act. After filing the affidavit with the government's agent and paying the $10 fee, the homesteader could begin occupying their claim. The government agent received the same fee for homesteaded land as they would have received had the land been sold for cash.
That's good.
Huh?
I said that's good.
Yeah. One half from the homesteader's filing fee and the other half from the patent certificate fee. The homesteader did not get a certificate or patent until they had their heirs filed after 5 years, but before 7 years, further affidavits from 2 neighbors or credible witnesses and an additional $8 fee. Those affidavits affirmed the 5 years residence or cultivation, and that no part of said land had been alienated, transferred, or mortgaged, and that the homesteader had borne true allegiance to the government of the United States. If both parents died and their children were under 21, an executor under state law could sell, for the benefit of the children and not the estate, an absolute title to the land within 2 years of the parent's death. The purchaser would pay the office fees for the patent of the land. Now, one thing that's also kind of fun to see sometimes, and most counties have it, your county seats, sometimes your history books will have it. What they have is that they have section maps, and they're a big lot of land with a lot of squares on it. And what would happen is that as properties were filled in, selected, sometimes, the mother and father would take these 2 squares, one of their adult children would take one of the squares to the next. So, they would try to control as much of a property near each other as they could.
Makes sense.
One of the books that I have actually shows that feature for the lakeside community, because it actually shows the 4 quadrants that would have made up the township. Now, as we go into further detail, they'll also explain a little bit of the problem that they had with said squares and property and stuff. In 1866, the Southern Homestead Act was established that would allow poor tenant farmers and sharecroppers in the South to become landowners in the southern United States during Reconstruction. In the South, poor farmers and sharecroppers made up the majority of population, so the Act sold land at a lower price to decrease poverty among the working class. And it was not very successful, as even the low prices and fees were often too much for the applicants to afford. The land made available was also mostly undeveloped forest, and only white people had the means to make them productive. In 1873, the Timber Culture Act came along, and this granted 160 acres of land to a homesteader who also would plant at least 40 acres, revised down to 10 acres of trees, over a period of several years. This quarter section could be added to an existing homestead claim, offering a total of 320 acres to a settler. So, again, more land to control, but you'd also have purposes that you had to use the land for.
Mm-hmm.
In the 1862 homestead did not include indigenous peoples, so Congress in 1875 passed the Indian Homestead Act to give Native families the heads the opportunity to purchase homesteads from unclaimed public lands. This was under the condition that the individual relinquishes their tribal identity and relations along with the land improvement requirements. The federal land title is not officially granted to Native Americans until a period of 5 years had passed. Now, because the United States government did not issue fee waivers, many poor non-reservation natives were unable to pay filing fees to claim homesteads. Access to such homesteads was further complicated by delays in resolving border disputes due to the distance and discord between the U.S. Land Office and the Bureau of Indian Affairs. This made white settlements easier to finalize. In 1904, along came the Kincaid Amendment. Now, this one actually is kind of fun for us up here in South Dakota. This dealt with Nebraska. Recognizing the sand hills of north central Nebraska required more than 160 acres for a claimant to support a family, Congress passed the Kincaid Act, which granted larger homestead tracts up to 640 acres to homesteaders in Nebraska. Yeah, you'd have to find land that you could actually do something with. Some of that down there was so arid and, sandy, it was hard to get anything to grow. But where they could, it was really good soil. And then 2 years after that, along came the Forest Homestead Act in 1906. And this act allowed homesteads within forest reserves, created in 1891 and on, and national forests from 1905 on, responding to opponents from the nation's forest reserves who felt land suited for agriculture was being withheld from private development. The homestead applications were reviewed by the Forest Service. While the first 5 years of residencies were required, in 1913 the act was amended to allow approving it for just 3 years, so they could try to get it into the systems and get it working for the people. They also had an enlarged Homestead Act in 1909. Due to the early 1900s, much of the prime low-lying alluvial land along rivers had been homesteaded. The enlarged Homestead Act was passed. It enabled dryland farming. We read about that down there in Scottsbluff at that one museum. They actually, this was kind of amazing, they sent a guy over to Morocco, near the Sahara Desert, to try to figure out how to do dry land farming. And it was kind of interesting, because when he came back, he said, well, one of the things that they worked with is you had fields that would be basically kept fallow. They wouldn't grow anything on certain quadrants. And then it's like every third year, then they would let that one grow, and this one over here would be basically shut down for 2 years. And so they would be able to rotate the crops so the soil wouldn't be completely depleted. It's kind of interesting. Now what happened to enable this dryland farming? The increased number of acres for a homestead went up to 320 acres, given to farmers who accepted more marginal lands, especially in the Great Plains, which could not be easily irrigated. A massive influx of these new farmers, combined with inappropriate cultivation techniques and the misunderstanding of ecology, led to the Dust Bowls. Fun times in the 1930s. In 1916, the Stock Raising Homestead Act was passed for settlers seeking 640 acres of public land for ranching purposes. You think about up here, some of the places that they've had some absolutely huge ranches. Bixby.
Bixby, when did you do that again?
Yeah. Bixby was this great big ranch area that was just north of Meade in Perkins County. Huge amount of land. And it was good for feeding your cattle. And there were a couple other homesteads up there. One was for a fellow named Lemon, who now the town bears his namesake. But he was able to get, with a little help from Washington, the grazing rights for a whole bunch of area by the Cheyenne River. And, he was able to move the cattle in and out, make sure they kept fed. And, if you had enough acreage, you could do ranching really well. And of course, my sweetie made the fun comment that there's a difference between farming and ranching. Ranching uses animals, farming uses crops. Very simple, but very accurate. Also, ranchers need to know to make sure that they have access to things like hay, stuff that you can continually feed to your animals. Otherwise, the animals can't do much if they're starving. Now, another little quid pro quo that they worked off of the subsistence homesteads provisions under the New Deal in the 1930s. Now, by the 1930s, things were getting really ugly with the Depression. They just got done getting Franklin Delano Roosevelt into office. And renewed interest in homesteading was brought about by the subsistence homesteading implemented in the 1930s under the New Deal. In 1938, Congress passed a law called the Small Tract Act of 1938, in which it was possible for any citizen to obtain certain lands from the federal government for residence, recreation, or business purposes. These tracts may not be larger than 5 acres. A 5-acre tract would be one that is about 660 feet long by 330 feet wide, or its equivalent. The property was to be improved with a building. Starting in July of 1955, improvement was required to be minimum of 400 square feet of space. 4,000 previously classified small tracts were offered at public auction of fair market value by the Los Angeles office of the BLM, Bureau of Land Management, in 1958. Now, settlers would find land and filled their claims at the regional land office, usually in individual family units, although others formed closer knit communities. Often the homestead consisted of several buildings or structures besides the main house. The Homestead Act gave rise later to new phenomena, large land rushes, like the Oklahoma land rushes in the 1880s and 1890s. The Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976 would bring the end to homesteading. By that time, federal government policy had shifted from retaining control of western public lands. The only exception to this policy was in Alaska, where the land allowed homesteading until 1986. Elizabeth Betty Klaus Smith was the last woman homesteader to successfully prove up her land in her own name. She was among a group of people, including her son William J. Smith, who filed for homesteading in Big Delta, Alaska. On October 18, 1984, she received a patent for 116 acres of a claim. And the last claim of the act was made by Ken Deerdoff for 80 acres on his land in Stony River in southwestern Alaska. He fulfilled all the requirements for the Homestead Act in 1979, but did not receive his deed until 1988. Officially, he was the last person to receive a title to land claimed under the Homestead Act. Now, the big thing to remember about the Homestead Act was that the way that it worked, it was designed to help move people from the east out west.
Everybody go west. Go that way.
Go west, that way,
Go away, go away, go away.
Of course, some people also like to say take the train. But the big thing is that, they were putting out ads in other countries, come in from Scandinavia, come in from France, come in from England, a lot of places people were lured out here with the idea that, the land is great, it grows really good, there's great moisture. Some places it was really good. Some places it turned into kind of an agricultural nightmare. And this is where you have the fun calendar of events, because when they first opened up homesteading in South Dakota after statehood, the first 2 or 3 years was really good. You got a lot of rain on the western side of the Missouri River. However, once you started getting into those arid years, there was a stretch of about 3 to 4 years where very little grew. The grasses had problems, your plants had problems, potatoes had problems, and sometimes these poor workers, they would have to find second jobs to go out, get more crops, drill for wells, take care of their homesteading needs.
Man.
And there's also times where people used these developments, these land, and as soon as they proved it up, they would go to their next door neighbor and say, "Hey, you want to buy this?
What this?
This 40 acres, this 80 acres,
more space?
160 acres. You want a ranch?" And that's exactly what they would do, because you figure after X number of years of trying to get this to work, and this guy over here is doing great ranching while your farming has been very piecemeal. Cut your losses and walk away with a bunch of money. Go back east. And it also worked out that way for some places. I remember them talking about a story in Perkins County about that, because they had a bunch of land that it didn't work. The homesteading didn't work. The people gave up. They moved on. Well, the government had to do something. And so what they wound up doing is that they actually plowed under the plowed fields, and they restored the land as best as they could to forest. And up there they also had flooded an area, built this huge lake, this reservoir, the Shade Hill. And it's, to this day, people go out there, they camp, they go fishing. It's a good recreation area. And that's what they had to do with some of that land, that they weren't able to get things to actually work. Now, at the same time, when they finally came up with the stockyard idea, it worked out really well for a lot of places, because, let's look at Harding County. Harding County has a really low human population for the entire county. It's a huge county, but it just does not have that many people. But for every man, woman, and child inside Harding County, there is like 64 animals per person. That's how many animals you have out there grazing, raising livestock. You have sheep, you have cattle, you have deer. All of these animals live up there. And so it's great for ranching. Wasn't really good for, growing crops, because you have a lot of areas that were, we kind of call it the Northern Badlands for a reason. It looks kind of like the Badlands. It's kind of dry, desolate, and they didn't get a lot of moisture. And that's where you also have the fun time between eastern South Dakota and western South Dakota. Eastern South Dakota had no problem with moisture. They still don't. You get a lot of rain. You get a lot of snow. You get a lot of, varieties of participation in locations. The precipitation is going to be the key factor if you can get things to grow. They tried to get certain things to grow as far as crops with, water projects coming into western South Dakota. They actually have water that leads all the way from the Missouri River all the way to the Oglala Lakota County. It's all piped. But at the same time, when you see how their water systems are down on Pine Ridge, you can kind of understand, because the water in the ground, which is really kind of odd, is almost brackish coming out of the pipes, the pumps. It smells bad. You wouldn't want to give it to your cattle. But what's really weird is that if you drill down far enough, you can hit the aquifer, and that's good water. But back then they didn't have that accessibility,
Right.
and that was the way that they had to work with it. But
Yay, people.
Smart people.
Well, they did what they could do and what they had to do.
Yeah, and so a lot of towns did develop. Buffalo in Hardin County, Lemon in Perkins County. There's some towns that are still there in Meade County that grew, thrived, and people still live there. And so, the Homestead Act helped bring people from outside the United States and moved people from the eastern side of the country out west. And for richer, for poorer, and for the benefits. I'd say it was solutions that we needed to grow the country, and likewise, it was kind of a learning lesson everybody needed to experience. So, but this has been the Bearded Historian for another Wayback Wednesday, and you won't see me next week because my wife's going to kill me off, and then we won't have to worry about that.
No, you're going to take a nap.
Oh, okay.
No vacation.
Good night, peoples.
Yeah. 28 minutes.